The wastelands of Traxxas 4 stretched endlessly beneath a sky bruised with the aftermath of orbital bombardments. Ash fell like snow, settling over jagged spires of shattered machinery and the skeletal remains of once thriving cities. Each breath tasted of soot and decay, a reminder that this planet had been a cradle of war long before Rylan arrived. His scavenging had been fruitless for hours. A handful of warped alloys, a burnt-out power cell, and a ration pack gnawed through by some vermin, desperate enough to endure the ash-slicked taste. Rylan shoved the remains into his pack anyway. Survival out here wasn't about preference. It was about scraping by with whatever could still be used, sold, or bartered. The air carried an uneasy silence, broken only by the occasional distant echo of collapsing wreckage. Rylan didn't trust silence. He'd learned years ago it often preceded the most violent interruptions. Still, he pushed forward, his boots crunching on scorched earth as he descended into the ruins of what might have once been a transport hub. The structure loomed ahead, half swallowed by debris. A twisted archway marked the entrance, its surface scorched black but still holding the faint remnants of alien glyphs. He paused there, running a gloved hand over the carvings. They were unfamiliar, yet eerily deliberate, like something crafted not just to mark, but to warn. "Nothing here worth dying for," he muttered to himself, his voice muffled by the respirator mask that clung to his face. And yet, as he stepped inside, a flicker of movement caught his eye, so fleeting it could have been his own shadow stretched and distorted by the pale, toxic light filtering through cracks in the ceiling. His hand instinctively moved to the blaster holstered at his side, fingers curling around its grip. The room was a graveyard of machinery, broken consoles and shattered screens littering the floor. Piles of ash and debris had settled into every corner. Still, there was an undeniable sense of presence. Then he heard it. A sound so faint it might have been mistaken for the wind. A ragged, almost inaudible breath. Rylan froze, every muscle tensing. He scanned the room slowly, his eyes darting between the shadows. Nothing moved. The sound came again, just barely perceptible, a gasp shallow and uneven. It wasn't the kind of noise made by a machine sputtering out its last cycle. Someone was here. His blaster cleared the holster with a practiced motion, the weapon humming faintly as it powered up. He stepped forward, careful not to disturb the debris underfoot. His pulse quickened, and for a moment he considered turning back. Whatever, or whoever, was here wasn't his concern. He could leave, return to his ship, and search for salvage somewhere less ominous. But something stopped him. A glint of metal caught his eye beneath a collapsed support beam, half buried in ash. Not just metal, armor. Rylan crouched, his weapon still raised, and brushed away the soot with his free hand. The figure beneath the rubble was almost unrecognizable at first, their form hidden by layers of debris and the faint glow of their cracked plating. It wasn't until he saw her eyes, crimson, vivid even in the dim light, that he realized she was alive. Her gaze locked onto his, burning with a mix of defiance and desperation. The alien woman's breathing was shallow, her lips pressed into a grim line. Her armor, once ornate and gleaming, was now scorched and fractured, exposing pale, bruised skin beneath. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Rylan wasn't sure if she was too weak to attack or simply gauging his intentions. "You're human," she rasped finally, her voice thick with exhaustion and something else he couldn't quite place. "Not your enemy," Rylan replied cautiously, though he didn't lower his weapon. Not yet, anyway. A flicker of amusement crossed her face, quickly replaced by pain. "That remains to be seen." He glanced at her condition, noting the blood pooling beneath her where shards of her armor had cut into her side. Her injuries were severe enough that she'd be dead in hours without help. And yet, there was something deeply unsettling about her. The glyphs on the archway outside, the eerie quiet of the ruins, it all seemed connected to her presence. "Who are you?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she closed her eyes, her expression hardening as if summoning the last reserves of her strength. Vilka, she said finally, and if you value your life, you'll leave me here. Rylan frowned. You don't look like someone who gets left behind. Her eyes snapped open, blazing with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. I am hunted, she said, each word deliberate, and those who hunt me will not care who stands in their way. The weight of her statement hung in the air, filling the space between them with unspoken implications. Rylan's instincts screamed at him to walk away, to let her fate play out without his interference. But something about her, a quiet defiance, a vulnerability carefully veiled behind the sharpness of her gaze, stopped him. He reached into his pack and pulled out a ration bar, holding it out cautiously. Eat, he said simply. She stared at him, suspicion flickering across her face before hunger overcame her pride. She snatched the bar from his hand, devouring it with a ferocity that spoke volumes about how long she'd gone without sustenance. Why? She asked between bites, her voice hoarse. Rylan shrugged, holstering his blaster. You don't look like you deserve to die here. Not yet, anyway. Vilka's expression darkened, but she said nothing. As the last of the ration disappeared, she leaned back, her breathing steadier now. You've made a mistake, she said softly, her tone laced with something that sounded almost like regret. Wouldn't be my first, Rylan replied. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint, unmistakable hum of an approaching patrol drone. Rylan's stomach twisted. Stay quiet, he said, his voice low. But Vilka's crimson eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, a warning and a promise. They won't stop hunting, she said. Not for me, and now, not for you. The faint hum of the patrol drone grew louder, a mechanical buzz that seemed to vibrate through the air, bouncing off the twisted metal and jagged ruins. Rylan crouched instinctively, his hand hovering near his blaster, eyes scanning the narrow beams of light spilling into the broken structure. Vilka hadn't moved. She remained slumped against the rubble, her crimson eyes half-lidded, tracking him rather than the sound outside. There was something in her gaze, a quiet calculation that unsettled him. You need to hide, Rylan whispered, his voice barely audible over the drone's approach. Vilka tilted her head slightly, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. Do I look capable of hiding, human? Her words were sharp, but her tone lacked the venom he'd expected. She was right. In her condition, she wasn't going anywhere. Rylan's jaw tightened as his mind raced for a solution. He hadn't come here to play hero, but leaving her behind wasn't an option anymore. You don't have to make this harder than it already is, he shot back, his voice low. Do you want to survive, or are you just here to make my life miserable? Survive? She repeated, the word hanging in the air like a challenge. You don't understand. Survival is already a betrayal. Before he could decipher her cryptic remark, the sound of the drone shifted. It was closer now, its high-pitched whine oscillating as it hovered, searching. A sharp beam of light pierced through the ceiling's cracks, sweeping across the room in slow arcs. Rylan swallowed hard. He moved quickly, stepping into the shadows near Vilka. His body blocked the direct line of sight from the light, but he wasn't confident it would be enough. The technology in those drones wasn't limited to visual detection. You're going to get me killed, he muttered, glancing at her. Her smirk returned, faint but undeniable. You made that choice when you stayed. Before he could reply, the drone's spotlight snapped to the far side of the room, illuminating a cluster of debris. It wasn't random. The beam locked on with purpose, scanning. Damn it, Rylan hissed under his breath. The silence broke with a sudden burst of noise. A metallic clang reverberated as the drone dropped something, a spherical device that began emitting a low-frequency hum. Rylan didn't need to see it to know what it was. A recon beacon. It wouldn't just alert the patrols, it would map their precise location. He reached for his blaster and fired without hesitation. The energy bolt sliced through the air, striking the beacon dead on. Sparks erupted, and the device sputtered before going dark. The drone's response was immediate. Its hum shifted into a higher pitch, and its spotlight turned toward them. "Stay down," Rylan growled, stepping away from Valka as the drone swooped closer. It fired first, a pulse of searing light exploding against the wall behind him. Rylan ducked and rolled, his return shot catching the edge of the machine. The impact sent it spinning, but it corrected quickly, its aggression now fully directed at him. Vyelka watched, her expression unreadable, as Rylan dodged another pulse and fired again. His second shot found its mark, shattering the drone's sensor array. The machine sputtered and veered off course, crashing into the debris with a final hollow thud. The room fell silent once more, the acrid smell of burnt circuitry mingling with the omnipresent ash. Rylan stood over the wreckage, breathing heavily. "Well," he muttered, holstering his blaster. "That's one problem solved." Vyelka's laugh was quiet but sharp, like glass breaking beneath a heavy boot. "You think that was the only problem?" she asked, her tone almost amused. Rylan turned to her, his irritation flaring. "You want to enlighten me, or are you just going to keep being cryptic?" Her amusement faded, replaced by something darker. "You don't understand what you've involved yourself in, human. That drone wasn't searching for just anyone. It was searching for me. And now, it will bring others." Her words landed with the weight of inevitability. Rylan cursed under his breath, pacing as he processed her warning. "Then we need to move," he said finally. Valka raised an eyebrow. "Move? Where exactly? You think you can outrun them?" Rylan stopped pacing and fixed her with a hard stare. "Sitting here isn't an option, so unless you've got a better idea—" "You're a fool," she interrupted, though there was no malice in her voice. "But perhaps a useful one." She shifted slightly, wincing as the movement aggravated her wounds. For the first time, Rylan noticed just how pale her skin had become, how her breathing was growing more labored. "I can't carry you," he said bluntly, though the admission made his stomach churn. "Good," she replied, a flicker of her earlier defiance returning. "I don't need to be carried." With a great deal of effort, she pushed herself upright, her movements slow but deliberate. Her armor groaned in protest, pieces of it flaking off like dead skin. She leaned against the wall for support, her crimson eyes locking onto his. "If we're going to survive," she said, her voice steady despite her obvious pain, "you need to understand something. Helping me isn't an act of charity. It's a choice. And once you've made it, there's no going back." Rylan crossed his arms, his irritation giving way to curiosity. "What's that supposed to mean?" Valka hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. Finally she spoke, her words deliberate. "I'm not just hunted because of what I've done," she said. "I'm hunted because of what I know. If they catch me, it won't just be my life they end. It will be anyone who's seen me, anyone who's heard me speak." Her gaze was piercing, her tone unflinching. "That includes you." The weight of her statement settled over him like a suffocating shroud. Rylan's instincts screamed at him to walk away, to leave her to whatever fate she'd brought upon herself. But something about her words, about her, made it impossible to turn back now. The silence stretched between them until Rylan finally broke it. "Then I guess we'd better get moving," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging in his mind. Vyelka smirked, a faint glimmer of approval in her expression. "Perhaps you're not as foolish as you seem." The sound of distant engines rumbled through the ruins, a stark reminder that time was running out. "Stay close," Rylan said, already moving toward the exit. Vyelka followed, her steps faltering but resolute. Behind them, the shadows seemed to grow deeper, as if the ruins themselves were watching their every move. The ruins of Traxxas IV were a labyrinth of broken structures and ashen pathways, twisting and crumbling in ways that defied both logic and memory. Rylan led the way, his senses on edge, the silence around them a suffocating weight. Valka followed close behind, her steps uneven but determined, her crimson gaze scanning every shadow. Every sound, A distant creak of settling metal, the occasional hiss of wind through fractured walls, felt amplified, as though the planet itself was holding its breath. Ryland's grip on his blaster was tight enough to whiten his knuckles. He couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched, even though the drones hadn't reappeared since their earlier encounter. "We're not alone," Valka said suddenly, her voice low but cutting through the quiet like a blade. Ryland glanced back at her. What gave it away? The drones? The endless, creepy silence? She didn't smile at his attempt at levity. Instead, she stopped walking, her posture stiffening as she closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed, her chest rising and falling with a deliberate rhythm. "What are you doing?" Ryland asked, his voice a harsh whisper. "Listening," she replied without opening her eyes. Ryland frowned but didn't argue. He shifted his stance, his eyes sweeping the ruins around them. He hated standing still. It felt like painting a target on their backs. After a moment, Vyelka opened her eyes, a sharp intensity in her gaze. "There's something ahead of us," she said. "Something alive." Ryland's gut twisted. "How do you know?" She hesitated, as if debating whether to explain. "My people are trained to sense more than what can be seen or heard," she said finally. "Call it instinct if you like." "Instinct," Ryland repeated, skeptical. Valka shot him a look that could have melted steel. "You can doubt me all you want, human. Just know that walking blindly into this will get us both killed." Before he could respond, a low guttural growl echoed from the darkness ahead. It wasn't mechanical, it was organic, primal. The sound sent a chill down Ryland's spine, and he raised his blaster instinctively. "What the hell was that?" he muttered. Valka didn't answer. Instead, she stepped forward, her movements cautious but deliberate. Ryland wanted to tell her to stop, to remind her she could barely stand, but the look on her face stopped him. She was afraid. Not the kind of fear that paralyzed or overwhelmed. It was controlled, focused, but it was there, etched into the tightness of her jaw and the set of her shoulders. "Stay behind me," she said, her voice low and firm. Ryland almost laughed. "You can barely walk and you think you're going to protect me?" She didn't look back. This isn't about protection. It's about survival. The growl came again, louder this time, and the shadows ahead seemed to shift, as if something massive was moving just out of sight. Ryland's finger hovered over the trigger of his blaster, his pulse pounding in his ears. Then it stepped into the light. The creature was enormous, its body a twisted amalgamation of muscle and sinew, covered in patches of dark, leathery skin. Its eyes glowed faintly, a sickly yellow hue that seemed to pierce through the gloom. Razor-sharp claws clicked against the ground as it moved, and its jaw, lined with jagged teeth, opened slightly, releasing another guttural growl. "What the hell is that?" Ryland whispered, his voice barely audible. Vyelka's expression hardened. "A hunter," she said, "sent to track me." The creature's gaze locked onto them, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then it charged. Ryland fired first, the blaster's bolt striking the creature's shoulder. It barely flinched, its massive body barreling forward with unstoppable momentum. Vyelka moved faster than he thought possible, sidestepping the creature's lunge and slamming the broken remains of her gauntlet into its side. The impact sent a shockwave through the air, and the creature staggered, its growl turning into a snarl of pain and fury. "You didn't tell me you could fight," Ryland said, his voice strained as he dodged the creature's snapping jaws. "You didn't ask," Vyelka shot back, her tone almost amused despite the chaos. The creature turned its attention to her, its glowing eyes narrowing as it lunged again. Vyelka met its charge head-on, her movements fluid despite her injuries. She ducked under its claws, driving a jagged piece of metal into its side. The creature roared, its massive body twisting as it tried to shake her off. Ryland took the opportunity to fire again, his shots aimed at the exposed patches of flesh on its back. The bolts struck true, and the creature faltered, its movements growing more erratic. But it wasn't done. With a final, desperate lunge, it knocked Vyelka to the ground, its claws raking across her armor. She cried out, the sound raw and visceral, and Ryland's stomach dropped. Without thinking, he charged forward, firing his blaster until it overheated. The shots drove the creature back just enough for him to pull Violka to her feet. "Move!" he shouted, dragging her away from the still snarling beast. They stumbled through the ruins, the sound of the creature's growls fading behind them. Ryland's chest burned with every breath, his muscles screaming in protest, but he didn't stop until they were sure the creature wasn't following. Finally, they collapsed against a wall, both of them gasping for air. "You didn't have to do that," Violka said between breaths. Ryland glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Yeah, well, you'd better start being worth the trouble." Violka managed a weak smile, her crimson eyes meeting his. "You have no idea what kind of trouble you've just signed up for." Before he could respond, she reached into the shattered remains of her armor and pulled out a small glowing device. "What is that?" Ryland asked, his eyes narrowing. She hesitated, her expression unreadable. "A key," she said finally, "to something they'll kill anyone to keep buried." The words hung in the air, heavy with implications Ryland couldn't yet grasp. Whatever this key was, it had just raised the stakes far beyond anything he'd anticipated. The glowing device in Violka's hand cast an eerie light over the narrow space where they had taken refuge. Its radiance flickered faintly, pulsing in time with some unseen rhythm like a heartbeat. Ryland stared at it, unease gnawing at the edges of his mind. "This," Violka began, her voice barely above a whisper, "is what they're after." Ryland's eyes narrowed. "A glowing rock? You've got to be kidding me." Violka shot him a withering look, the kind that could silence a room. "It's not a rock. It's a fragment of something far greater, something my people created but could never control." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implications. Ryland wanted to press her for details, but there was something in her expression, something raw and haunted, that made him hesitate. "Go on," he said instead, keeping his tone even. Violka turned the fragment over in her hands, her crimson eyes reflecting its faint glow. "We called it Kairos. It was meant to be our salvation, a weapon that could end wars, secure dominance across the galaxy. But—" She hesitated, the memory seeming to choke her. "But what?" Ryland pressed. Her grip tightened on the fragment. "It wasn't just a weapon. It was alive in a way. It fed on conflict, on destruction. The more we used it, the more it consumed, until it began to turn on us." Ryland leaned back, trying to process what she was saying. "You're telling me this thing— what? Thinks for itself? Feeds on war?" "It doesn't think," Violka corrected. "Not like you or I. But it has instincts, hunger, and when it's whole, its power is unimaginable. That's why it was shattered, scattered across the galaxy, its pieces hidden and guarded." "And let me guess," Ryland said dryly, "your people want to put it back together." Violka nodded, her expression grim. "Not all of them. There are those who understand the danger, who believe it should remain buried. But the ones hunting me—" Her voice trailed off, and she didn't need to finish the sentence. Ryland exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Great. So now I'm stuck with a fugitive carrying a piece of galaxy-ending doom. Fantastic." Violka's gaze hardened. "You chose this, human. You could have walked away." "Yeah, well," Ryland muttered, "I'm starting to regret that decision." Before Violka could respond, a distant rumble echoed through the ruins. It wasn't the sound of settling debris. It was deeper, more deliberate. "They've found us," she said, her voice tight with urgency. Ryland swore under his breath. "How long do we have?" "Not long," she replied, already moving. Despite her injuries, there was a newfound strength in her movements, as if holding the fragment had reignited something within her. Ryland followed her out into the open, his blaster drawn. The air was thick with tension. every shadow seeming to shift and breathe. As they moved through the ruins, Ryland's mind raced. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something, some critical piece of the puzzle. "Why didn't you destroy it?" he asked suddenly. Valka glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "The fragments are indestructible. Believe me, we tried." "Convenient," Ryland muttered. Valka ignored his sarcasm, her focus shifting to the path ahead. "There's a way out of this," she said after a moment. "But it won't be easy." Ryland raised an eyebrow. "I'm sensing a but coming." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "The fragment can't stay with me. If they capture me, they'll have everything they need to track the others. I need you to take it." Ryland blinked. "You're kidding, right? You just finished telling me how dangerous this thing is, and now you want me to carry it?" "I don't want you to carry it," Valka snapped. "I need you to. There's a difference." Ryland shook his head, disbelief etched into his features. "Why me? I'm just a guy trying to survive. I'm not some hero." Valka stepped closer, her gaze piercing. "You're more than that, whether you see it or not. You've already proven it by staying." The sincerity in her voice caught him off guard, and for a moment he didn't know what to say. The rumble of engines shattered the silence, growing louder by the second. Valka pressed the fragment into his hand, her grip firm. "Keep it safe," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "If they take me, you run. Don't look back." Ryland opened his mouth to protest, but the sound of approaching footsteps cut him off. Valka turned toward the noise, drawing herself to her full height despite her injuries. "What are you doing?" Ryland demanded. "Buying you time," she said simply. Ryland's heart pounded as he watched her walk toward the enemy, her movements deliberate and unyielding. For a moment, he considered running after her, but the weight of the fragment in his hand stopped him. She was right. If he stayed, they'd both be caught. Clenching his jaw, Ryland turned and ran, his footsteps echoing through the ruins. The sound of conflict erupted behind him. Blaster fire, the clash of metal, Valka's battle cry. He didn't look back. As he ran, the fragment's glow seemed to intensify, casting long shadows against the walls. It was warm in his hand, almost comforting, but it also carried an undeniable weight, a reminder of the responsibility he now bore. For the first time, Ryland realized just how far he'd been pulled into this conflict, and there was no turning back. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for certain. His life would never be the same. The fragment's glow pulsed softly in Ryland's hand, its rhythm steady and unyielding, like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. He could still hear the echoes of the battle he'd fled, faint and distant now, but etched into his memory. Valka's voice, sharp and defiant, rang in his ears, a promise of strength and sacrifice that he had no right to question. He stopped running. The ruins stretched around him in all directions, jagged spires of metal and stone reaching toward a sky bruised with the hues of a dying sun. It felt as if the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for him to make his choice. And for the first time in his life, Ryland understood that the choice was entirely his. He clenched the fragment tightly, its warmth spreading through his palm. He couldn't leave her, not like this. She had risked everything to protect this piece of unimaginable power, to stop it from falling into the wrong hands. And now it was his turn to do the same. Turning on his heel, Ryland began retracing his steps, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. He didn't know what he would find when he returned, but he knew he couldn't abandon her. The sounds of conflict grew louder as he approached, the sharp crack of blaster fire mingling with the guttural roars of alien voices. Ryland ducked behind a crumbling wall, peering out cautiously. Valka was still standing. Her armor was battered, her movements slower than before, but she fought with a ferocity that was almost otherworldly. Her crimson eyes burned with an intensity that seemed to drive her opponents back, even as they closed in around her. Ryland's breath caught in his throat. There were too many of them, more than he'd expected. Valka couldn't hold them off forever. He weighed the fragment in his hand, its pulsing glow a steady reminder of the power it contained. It was then that an idea began to take shape in his mind. It was reckless, dangerous, and probably suicidal. But it might just work. Slipping the fragment into a pouch on his belt, Ryland took a deep breath and stepped out from behind the wall. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The soldiers turned toward him, their weapons trained on his chest. Vielka froze, her expression a mix of shock and fury. "What are you doing?" she hissed, her voice barely audible over the din. Ryland ignored her, his focus on the soldiers. "You want this?" he said, patting the pouch. "Come and get it." Without waiting for a response, he turned and ran. The effect was immediate. The soldiers shouted orders, their focus shifting entirely to him. Blaster bolts sizzled through the air, narrowly missing him as he darted through the ruins. Ryland's heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He didn't know how far he could lead them, or how long he could keep this up, but he knew he had to give Vielka a chance. The fragment's glow grew brighter with each passing moment, as if responding to the chaos around it. Ryland could feel its energy coursing through him, a strange and unsettling sensation that made his skin crawl. Finally, he reached a dead end, a massive chasm that split the ruins in two. He skidded to a halt, his boots kicking up a cloud of dust. The soldiers closed in behind him, their weapons trained on his back. Ryland turned slowly, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "You want it?" he said, his voice steady despite the fear that threatened to consume him. "Here." He reached for the fragment, its glow almost blinding now, and held it up for them to see. For a moment, the soldiers hesitated, their eyes fixed on the fragment with a mixture of awe and greed, and then Ryland threw it. The fragment sailed through the air, its light leaving a glowing trail in its wake. It landed just beyond the edge of the chasm, teetering on a narrow ledge. The soldiers scrambled toward it, their focus entirely on the fragment. Ryland didn't wait to see what happened next. He turned and ran back toward Vielka, his heart pounding with adrenaline. When he reached her, she was leaning against a wall, her breaths labored. "Did you—" she began, her voice weak. "I bought us some time," he said, helping her to her feet. "Let's go." Together, they made their way through the ruins, the sounds of the soldiers fading into the distance. Finally, they emerged into the open, the endless expanse of the desert stretching before them. The setting sun painted the horizon in shades of gold and crimson, a stark contrast to the darkness they had just escaped. Vielka turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You didn't have to come back." Ryland met her gaze, his own steady. "Yeah, well, I guess I'm not great at walking away." A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips, and for the first time, Ryland saw something in her eyes that wasn't fear or pain. Hope. As they began their journey across the desert, Ryland felt the weight of the fragment's absence, but also a strange sense of relief. The battle wasn't over, far from it, but for the first time, he felt like they had a chance, and sometimes, he realized, that was enough. The derelict ship floated in the infinite silence of the Orphean expanse, a ghost adrift on the black tide of the universe. Its hull was pockmarked with scars from battles long forgotten, jagged fissures that bled faint trails of silver light into the surrounding void. Stars shimmered distantly, uncaring, their cold radiance casting an eerie glow over the ship's surface. Dr. Mara Jensen stood at the edge of the cockpit window aboard her research vessel, the Archangel. Her dark, unkempt hair framed a face worn by years of solitude and relentless curiosity. The faint hum of her ship's systems filled the space around her, but her gaze remained fixed on the object of her obsession. Her breath fogged the glass as she whispered to herself, "It's real. It's actually real." Behind her, the AI interface Thren pulsed softly with cyan light. Its voice, calm yet tinged with programmed skepticism, broke the reverie. "Dr. Jensen, preliminary scans confirm the structure is approximately 2.6 kilometers in length." Composition suggests an alloy unfamiliar to human fabrication. This vessel predates any known records by at least 10 millennia. Mara's lips curled into a faint smile, her heart hammering against her ribs. 10 years of fruitless expeditions had led to this moment. Endless nights, deciphering fragments of lost star maps, and analyzing myths disguised as scientific theory had brought her here, to this graveyard of stars. 10 millennia, she murmured, more to herself than to Thren. And it's just been waiting here all this time. Her fingers brushed against the cold control panel as she initiated the docking sequence. The Archangel's thrusters hissed softly, guiding it toward the hulking mass of the ancient ship. As the vessel loomed closer, its details grew sharper. A labyrinthine surface etched with angular patterns that seemed to shift under the ship's running lights. Faint traces of an alien script glimmered like starlight caught in glass. "Dr. Jensen," Thren interjected, its tone more insistent. "I must caution against entering the structure without further analysis. This vessel's condition is unstable, and its origin is exactly why we have to go aboard," Mara cut in, her voice firm. "If we don't, someone else will, and they won't care about preserving history. They'll strip it for parts, sell it to the highest bidder." Thren paused for a beat, then relented. "Very well, but I suggest activating the drone escort. Safety protocols demand a minimum of—" "I'll be fine," she snapped, though the tension in her voice betrayed her. Minutes later, Mara stood in the airlock, her environment suit hissing as it sealed around her. She adjusted the straps of her equipment pack, her fingers trembling, not with fear but with anticipation. She keyed the helmet comms. "Thren, stay on high alert. If anything goes wrong—" "I'll initiate emergency retrieval protocols," the AI finished. "I am always vigilant, Doctor." "Jensen." The airlock hissed open, and Mara stepped into the void. Her magnetic boots clanked softly against the alien hull as she crossed the tenuous bridge between her ship and the derelict. Her heart raced, each step a drumbeat of uncertainty. When she reached the outer airlock of the ancient vessel, she noticed the markings surrounding the entrance. They weren't random patterns, but intricate designs, swirling like a frozen whirlpool of light and shadow. Mara traced them with a gloved hand, feeling a strange resonance vibrate faintly beneath her fingertips. "Fascinating," she muttered. "It's almost alive." The alien ship's airlock opened with an unexpected smoothness, as though it had been waiting for her touch. A shiver ran down her spine as she peered into the darkness beyond. Her helmet light illuminated a narrow corridor lined with walls that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. She stepped inside, her footsteps muffled by an eerie silence. The air, if it could be called that, felt heavy, laden with an indefinable presence. The further she ventured, the more the corridor widened, until it opened into a vast chamber that took her breath away. It was a cathedral of alien design. Towering pillars stretched into the shadows above, their surfaces inscribed with glyphs that pulsed faintly like dying embers. In the center of the chamber stood a raised platform, and atop it, encased in what looked like crystal, lay a humanoid figure. Mara's pulse quickened as she approached the stasis pod. The figure within was unlike anything she had ever seen. A woman, or at least something resembling one, lay suspended in perfect stillness. Her skin was a soft metallic hue that shimmered faintly, and her hair floated around her head like liquid silver. Bioluminescent markings ran across her face and arms, their patterns flowing like a living constellation. "Thren," Mara whispered, her voice trembling. "Are you seeing this?" "I am recording," the AI replied, its tone uncharacteristically subdued. "This is unprecedented." Mara circled the pod, her mind racing with questions. Who was this woman? What was her story? And why had she been left here, adrift in the void for millennia? She reached out to touch the pod's surface, but as her fingers brushed the crystal, a sudden surge of light flooded the chamber. Symbols on the walls ignited, their glow growing brighter and brighter until the entire room seemed to pulse with life. The stasis pod began to hum, a low, resonant sound that filled the air. "Dr. Jensen, you've triggered something," Thren said urgently. "Energy levels are spiking across the ship. I advise." The pod's surface cracked, releasing a hiss of vapor. Mara stumbled back, her heart pounding. The figure inside stirred, her eyes snapping open. They glowed gold, piercing and otherworldly, locking onto Mara's in an instant. The room fell into an unnatural stillness as the alien woman sat upright, her movements fluid yet deliberate. She spoke a single word, in a language that Mara couldn't understand, but its resonance sent a chill through her bones. The word echoed in her mind, a whisper and a roar all at once. And then, the ship itself seemed to awaken. The golden eyes of the alien woman glowed like twin suns, their unblinking stare cutting through the dim, ethereal light of the chamber. Mara Jensen's breath caught in her throat. The weight of those eyes, alien, unyielding, pressed down on her, as though she stood in the presence of something ancient and unfathomable. The woman rose slowly from the stasis pod, her movements unnervingly fluid. Her silvery hair cascaded around her, shimmering as if woven from strands of liquid light. Bioluminescent patterns on her skin pulsed faintly, shifting in a rhythm Mara couldn't decipher. Mara stepped back instinctively, her boots scraping against the floor of the chamber. "Thren," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What's happening?" "Energy readings are stabilizing," Thren replied, its tone clipped. "The chamber appears to be adjusting to her presence. I detect no immediate hostility, but—" The woman spoke again, her voice resonating with harmonic layers, like chords played on an alien instrument. The words meant nothing to Mara, yet they carried a weight that made her chest tighten. "I don't understand you," Mara said, her own voice trembling as she raised her hands in a gesture of peace. "Do you understand me? Can you—" The woman tilted her head, her glowing eyes narrowing as if she were studying Mara. Slowly, she extended a hand, palm outward. Her lips moved again, forming a single word that rang in Mara's ears like a bell struck underwater. In that instant, Mara's helmet interface flickered violently. The alien glyphs on the walls pulsed in unison with the markings on the woman's skin. Thren's voice cut through the noise. "Dr. Jensen, I am detecting neural interference. Her actions appear to be interacting with your suit's systems." "Interference?" Mara felt a sharp prick at the base of her skull. A wave of dizziness rolled over her, and she staggered, her vision blurring as the world seemed to tilt. The alien woman took a step forward, her gaze unrelenting. Mara forced herself to stand her ground, swallowing the fear that clawed at her throat. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice firmer than she felt. Then, as abruptly as it began, the flickering stopped. The glyphs dimmed, and the pulsing light faded to a faint glow. The woman's expression softened, just slightly, and she lowered her hand. Mara blinked, trying to steady her breath. "Thren, status report." "Your neural interface appears stable," the AI replied. "But the ship's systems are responding to her presence. Dr. Jensen, I recommend immediate retreat. This environment is beyond our understanding." Mara ignored the warning, her curiosity overpowering her caution. "Who are you?" she asked the woman. "What is this place?" The woman tilted her head again, her eyes narrowing in thought. Then she spoke, and this time, the glyphs on the walls shifted in response. Their light morphed into patterns that coalesced into an image. A starfield, vast and unfamiliar. Mara's eyes widened. "She's trying to show me something." The starfield began to move, lines connecting points of light into a map. At its center, a single star flared brighter than the rest, its light casting an ominous red hue over the chamber. The alien woman pointed to it, her gaze never leaving Mara's face. "Thren," Mara said, her voice tight. "Can you analyze that starfield? Cross-reference it with known charts?" "I am attempting to do so," Thren replied, However, the configuration does not match any documented regions within the Orphean expanse. It may be pre-cataclysmic. Pre-cataclysmic? Mara muttered. You're saying this map is older than... Before she could finish, the chamber shuddered violently. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, growing louder by the second. The glyphs on the walls flared, their light pulsating erratically. Dr. Jensen. Thren's voice was sharp now, tinged with urgency. We are not alone. I am detecting multiple external signals approaching the ship. Mara's stomach sank. Signals? From where? Unknown. They appear to be of human origin, but heavily encrypted. Their trajectory suggests intercept within 20 minutes. Mara turned to the alien woman, whose expression had shifted again. The calm, analytical gaze was gone, replaced by something sharper, something resembling fear. She moved quickly, stepping off the platform and gesturing for Mara to follow. Wait, Mara called after her, but the woman didn't stop. She moved with a graceful urgency, her bioluminescent patterns glowing brighter as she reached the chamber's far wall. With a single touch, a section of the wall slid open, revealing another corridor bathed in faint, flickering light. Thren, what's she doing? Mara asked, her voice tight as she followed. It appears she is accessing internal pathways, the AI said. Her familiarity with this structure suggests she has operational knowledge of the vessel. Dr. Jensen, I must stress that the approaching signals are likely hostile. You should prioritize escape. I'm not leaving, Mara snapped, not without answers. The corridor wound deeper into the ship, its architecture becoming increasingly alien. Walls shimmered with faint, shifting patterns that seemed to respond to their presence. The air grew thicker, tinged with an indescribable energy that made Mara's skin prickle. The alien woman stopped suddenly in front of a massive door, its surface marked with intricate glyphs that pulsed in time with her bioluminescence. She pressed her hand to the door, and it groaned open, revealing a chamber unlike any Mara had seen. A massive console dominated the room, its surface covered in glowing symbols and holographic displays. At its center was a sphere of shimmering light, suspended in mid-air, its surface swirling with patterns too complex for the human eye to follow. The woman turned to Mara, her expression grave. She pointed to the sphere, then to Mara, and finally to herself. What does she want me to do? Mara murmured, stepping closer to the console. As she reached out, the ship shuddered again, and a voice crackled through her comms, human, distorted, and cold. This is Captain Vrex of the Halcyon Syndicate. You've trespassed on restricted salvage. Stand down and prepare for boarding. Mara's blood ran cold. The Syndicate was notorious. Ruthless scavengers who claimed anything and everything of value in the galaxy's uncharted territories. Dr. Jensen, Thren said, its tone grim. Your window for retreat is rapidly closing. Mara looked back at the alien woman, who stood silently, her golden eyes filled with expectation. She glanced at the sphere, its light pulsing in synchrony with the glyphs around the room. Her mind raced. To stay meant risking capture, or worse, by the Syndicate. To flee meant abandoning the answers she had sought her entire life. The alien woman took a step forward, her expression softening for the first time. She placed a hand over her heart, then extended it toward Mara. A gesture of trust. Mara swallowed hard, her decision weighing heavy. The ship trembled again, and outside, the darkness closed in. The air was heavy in the chamber, a silence filled with latent tension. The shimmering sphere at the room's center pulsed steadily, its light casting intricate shifting patterns across the walls. Mara stood frozen, torn between the imminent threat of the Halcyon Syndicate closing in and the cryptic invitation extended by the alien woman before her. The woman's golden eyes locked onto Mara's, her extended hand trembling slightly, not from fear but urgency. Her bioluminescent patterns flickered like a heartbeat, glowing brighter as if in rhythm with the sphere. This has to be a mistake, Mara muttered under her breath, her mind racing. She can't expect me to... interact with this thing? What if it's a weapon? What if... Her thoughts were interrupted by Thren's dispassionate voice. "Doctor." "Jensen, Syndicate forces have docked with the exterior hull. I estimate they will breach the main airlock in 7 minutes. Your options for retreat are rapidly diminishing." 7 minutes, Mara repeated, her voice tight. She looked back at the alien woman. "I don't even know what you want from me." The woman stepped forward, her movements fluid yet commanding, and took Mara's hand in her own. The contact was startling. Her skin was warm, almost too warm, and a faint current seemed to hum between them. Without breaking eye contact, the woman guided Mara's hand toward the sphere. Mara tried to pull back instinctively, but the woman's grip was firm. "Wait, what are you—" The moment her fingertips brushed the sphere, a jolt surged through her body like an electric storm. The world around her dissolved in a kaleidoscope of light and sound. Her vision blurred, replaced by vivid images that moved too quickly to process. A fleet of sleek, alien ships gliding through the stars, a towering citadel of glowing spires, a battlefield strewn with bodies, both human and alien, and finally, the woman herself, standing amidst the wreckage, her expression one of profound loss. Mara gasped as the images faded, leaving her knees weak. She clutched the edge of the console for support, her breath coming in short, ragged bursts. "What was that?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The alien woman released her hand and stepped back, her expression unreadable. She pointed to the sphere again, then gestured toward the chamber's walls, where the glyphs had rearranged themselves into a complex, circular diagram. Thren's voice broke through the haze. "Dr. Jensen, I believe the sphere has initiated some form of data transfer. Your neural interface is synchronizing with its systems, but the process is incomplete." "Incomplete?" Mara echoed, her head pounding. "Thren, what's in that thing?" "Unknown. The data is encrypted beyond my capacity to decipher. However, I detect a substantial energy buildup within the sphere. It is likely tied to the ship's core systems." The alien woman's gestures grew more insistent, her bioluminescence flaring brighter. She pointed toward a control panel on the far side of the room, then back to the sphere. "She wants me to activate it?" Mara guessed aloud, her pulse quickening. Before Thren could respond, the chamber shuddered violently. A deep metallic groan echoed through the walls, followed by the unmistakable hiss of a plasma torch cutting through metal. "Dr. Jensen," Thren said urgently, "the Syndicate is breaching the ship. They are approximately 90 seconds from reaching this location." Mara's mind raced. She could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, the choices laid before her narrowing with every passing second. If she activated the sphere, she could be unleashing something catastrophic. But if she did nothing, the Syndicate would storm the chamber, and whatever secrets the ship held would fall into their hands. "Damn it," she hissed, moving toward the control panel. "If this kills me, I'm going to haunt every scientist who ever encouraged me to be curious." The alien woman watched her closely, her expression softening as Mara placed her hands on the console. The glyphs on its surface pulsed to life, responding to her touch. Symbols cascaded across the screen, too complex and alien for Mara to comprehend. But her hands moved instinctively, as though guided by an unseen force. "What's happening?" she muttered, her fingers dancing over the controls. "I believe the sphere is facilitating your interaction with the ship's systems," Thren replied. "Proceed with caution, Doctor." Jensen. The chamber vibrated with a low hum as the sphere began to spin slowly, its light intensifying. The air around it shimmered, distorting like heat waves. The glyphs on the walls shifted again, forming a massive, glowing script that spiraled upward. Then, a voice filled the chamber, a deep, resonant tone that seemed to emanate from the ship itself. The language was incomprehensible, yet it resonated in Mara's mind with a strange familiarity. The alien woman stepped forward, her face illuminated by the sphere's light. She placed a hand over her heart, then extended it toward Mara, nodding as if in approval. The moment was broken by a deafening crash. The chamber door exploded inward, shards of metal raining down as syndicate soldiers poured in, their weapons trained on Mara and the alien woman. "Step away from the console," barked a man at the front, his voice cold and commanding. He wore the insignia of the Halcyon Syndicate, his armor gleaming under the chamber's light. Mara froze, her hands hovering over the controls. "I don't know what you think you're going to find here," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "This ship is a tomb. There's nothing for you." The man sneered. "We'll decide that for ourselves. Now step back, or I'll shoot." Before Mara could respond, the alien woman moved. In a blur of motion, she closed the distance between herself and the soldiers, her bioluminescent patterns flaring with blinding intensity. The first soldier fired, but the bolt dissipated harmlessly against an invisible barrier. The woman raised her hands, and the chamber seemed to come alive. Glyphs on the walls flared, and the air crackled with energy. The soldiers cried out as their weapons short-circuited, sparks flying from their barrels. Mara stared in stunned disbelief. The alien woman turned to her, her golden eyes burning with an intensity that needed no translation. "Finish it," Mara whispered to herself. She turned back to the console and entered the final sequence. The sphere pulsed violently, its light expanding outward in a wave that washed over the entire chamber. The syndicate soldiers crumpled to the ground, unconscious but alive. And then, everything went still. The alien woman stepped beside Mara, placing a hand on her shoulder. The glyphs on the walls dimmed, their light fading into the shadows. "Thren," Mara said softly, her voice shaking. "What just happened?" "I do not know," the AI replied. "But the ship's energy levels have stabilized. Whatever the system is, it has been activated. I believe it is some form of failsafe." Mara looked at the alien woman, who now seemed impossibly weary, her golden eyes dimming slightly. The weight of the moment pressed down on Mara's chest. "What have I done?" she whispered. The alien woman said nothing, but the faint smile on her lips hinted at a truth Mara was only beginning to grasp. The silence that followed the sphere's activation was almost as deafening as the chaos that had preceded it. Mara stood at the center of the chamber, her breathing uneven as the last flickers of the glyphs faded into darkness. Around her, the unconscious syndicate soldiers lay scattered like broken chess pieces, their weapons smoldering where they'd fallen. The alien woman, Cirrus, that was the name Mara had plucked from the flood of images during the sphere's activation, watched her closely. Cirrus's golden eyes, dimmed but still intense, seemed to carry the weight of galaxies. Mara broke the silence first. "What was that?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "What did I just do?" Cirrus raised her hand, gesturing toward the sphere, now dim and still. She spoke again, the harmonic tones of her language resonating through the chamber, but still incomprehensible to Mara. Thren's voice filled the gap. "Dr. Jensen, I have begun deciphering the data retrieved from the sphere. It contains vast archives of historical, technological, and cultural records. But there is a specific subset of data that concerns me." Mara wiped sweat from her brow, her heart pounding. "Concern you? How?" "Among the records is a warning," Thren replied. "A weapon, Dr. Jensen. A device of immense destructive capability. The energy surge from the sphere's activation appears to have partially reawakened the ship's core systems, including those associated with this weapon." Mara felt her stomach churn. She turned to Cirrus, who was now moving toward the console, her gestures deliberate and confident. "You knew this was here," Mara said, her voice low. "Didn't you?" Cirrus paused, glancing back at Mara. For the first time, her expression showed something akin to regret. She touched her chest, then gestured outward, her bioluminescent markings pulsing faintly. "She's trying to explain," Mara muttered. "But I need more than gestures and cryptic light shows." Cirrus stepped back to Mara's side and placed a hand on her shoulder. Her touch was steady, grounding. Slowly she reached out toward the sphere again, inviting Mara to follow her lead. "Thren, analyze," Mara said as she reluctantly extended her hand. "Proceed with caution, Doctor." "Jensen," Thren warned. The moment Mara's fingers brushed the sphere, the floodgates opened again. This time, the images were clearer, their meaning sharper. She saw a civilization, Ceres's people, thriving amidst the stars. Their technology was unmatched, their wisdom spanning millennia. But with greatness came hubris. A conflict erupted, one that began as a political rift and escalated into total war. And at the heart of the war was the key, a device capable of bending the fabric of reality itself. It could create or destroy with a thought, reshape worlds, and eradicate civilizations in an instant. The images shifted to Ceres herself. She had been a guardian of the key, tasked with ensuring it would never fall into the wrong hands. But betrayal struck from within, and in the final days of the war, Ceres had sealed herself, and the key, within this ship, setting it adrift in the void to keep it hidden. Mara's mind reeled as the connection broke, leaving her breathless. "The key," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "It's here. That's what this ship is hiding." Ceres nodded solemnly, her eyes filled with an unspoken plea. Thren's voice was grim. "Dr. Jensen, if the Syndicate acquires this information, the consequences could be catastrophic. Their reputation for exploiting advanced technologies is well documented." Mara clenched her fists, her thoughts racing. "So we destroy it," she said. "The key, the ship, everything. If it's that dangerous, it can't be allowed to exist." Ceres's expression darkened, her bioluminescence flaring brighter. She stepped closer to Mara, shaking her head emphatically. "No?" Mara asked, her frustration boiling over. "What then? Do you expect me to keep this thing safe? Hide it forever?" Ceres touched her chest again, then pointed to Mara, her movements slow and deliberate. Finally, she gestured toward the sphere and the glyphs on the walls, her meaning unmistakable. "She believes you are part of the solution," Thren said. "Your neural interaction with the sphere has established a link. It is possible that Ceres views you as a successor to her mission." "A successor?" Mara whispered, the weight of the suggestion settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. No, that's insane. I can't." Her protest was cut short by the sound of heavy boots echoing through the corridor outside. The Syndicate soldiers were stirring, and more reinforcements were on their way. Time was running out. Mara turned to Thren. "If I activate the ship's self-destruct, how long will we have to escape?" "Unknown," Thren replied. "The ship's systems are alien and largely incomprehensible. Any attempt to trigger self-destruction carries significant risk." "Of course it does," Mara muttered bitterly. Ceres stepped forward, placing both hands on the console. The glyphs flared to life again, and a low hum filled the chamber. She glanced back at Mara, her gaze unwavering, then pointed to the console. "She's giving you a choice," Thren said, "but I cannot determine the nature of that choice." Mara stared at the console, her mind a storm of conflicting thoughts. She had spent her life chasing the mysteries of the universe, and now she stood on the precipice of one so profound it could redefine everything she knew. But the cost was unimaginable. "Ceres," Mara said, her voice trembling, "if I do this, if I help you, what happens to the key? To us?" Ceres didn't answer. She simply extended her hand once more, her golden eyes filled with both hope and sorrow. Mara's heart pounded as she reached out, her fingers trembling. With a deep breath, she made her decision. The chamber was silent once more, save for the soft hum of the sphere. Mara stood motionless, her hand clasped in Ceres's, as the alien woman guided her toward the console. The golden glow of Ceres's eyes reflected in the sphere's surface, which now pulsed with a rhythm that matched Mara's heartbeat, a synchrony born from her decision moments earlier. She had chosen to trust. Ceres released her hand and turned to the console, her gestures deliberate and reverent. The glyphs responded, glowing faintly, their patterns shifting into intricate spirals that pulsed outward like ripples in water. "What now?" Mara asked, her voice quieter than she intended. Thren's voice was steady, but tinged with an uncharacteristic solemnity. "Dr. Jensen, The sphere's energy levels are escalating. Based on my analysis, Ceres is initiating a protocol to neutralize the key. However, the process appears to come at a significant cost. Mara's stomach tightened. What kind of cost? Ceres glanced at her, the sorrow in her expression unmistakable. She reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of Mara's arm in what felt like an apology. Then she gestured toward the walls of the chamber. The glyphs flared, displaying an image. Ceres standing before the key, her hands raised as if containing its power. Around her, an aura of light engulfed the ship, consuming everything in its path. The final glyph, stark and brutal in its simplicity, depicted a lone figure in the void. Ceres, alone. No, Mara said, stepping back. There has to be another way. You're telling me you're going to sacrifice yourself to stop this thing? Ceres nodded solemnly. You can't just... Mara stopped herself. The look in Ceres's eyes said it all. This was not a decision made lightly, nor one that could be undone. It was her duty, her final act of guardianship. Thren interjected, his voice colder now. Dr. Jensen, the Syndicate forces are regrouping. They have overridden auxiliary security protocols and are en route to your location. Their arrival is imminent. Mara cursed under her breath. The weight of the moment pressed down on her. She had come to this ship seeking answers, and now it seemed the price of uncovering them would be paid in lives. Ceres stepped closer to the console and placed her hands firmly on its surface. The glyphs shifted, the spirals accelerating until they became a vortex of light. The ship itself began to hum, a deep, resonant tone that vibrated through the floor. Wait, Mara said, desperation creeping into her voice. You don't have to do this alone. Let me help. Ceres shook her head firmly, her bioluminescent markings flaring brighter. She pointed to the sphere, then to Mara, her meaning clear. You have a role to play, but not here. Mara's breath caught in her throat. You're sending me away, she said, her voice breaking. Aren't you? Ceres nodded again, her gaze softening. Before Mara could protest further, the chamber trembled violently. The Syndicate forces were closing in. Red emergency lights flickered in the corridor beyond the chamber's door, casting shadows that danced like specters. Thren's voice cut through the noise. Dr. Jensen, Ceres appears to be activating the ship's evacuation protocols. An escape pod has been prepared for you. I recommend immediate departure. Mara hesitated, her heart pounding. She turned back to Ceres. If I leave, if I go, how will I know you succeeded? Ceres tilted her head, considering the question. She stepped closer and placed a hand over Mara's heart. Then she spoke, her voice melodic and resonant, carrying a single word Mara somehow understood. Believe. Mara swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. The door behind her hissed open, revealing a narrow corridor bathed in pale blue light, the path to the escape pod. Ceres gestured toward it, her movements urgent now. The glyphs around the chamber brightened one final time, their light reaching a crescendo as the ship itself seemed to respond to Ceres's command. Mara turned to leave but stopped in the doorway. She glanced back at Ceres, committing every detail of the moment to memory, the golden eyes, the luminous markings, the quiet resolve in her expression. Thank you, Mara said, her voice trembling. Ceres gave a faint smile, the kind that spoke volumes without words. Then Mara ran. The escape pod launched moments later, a streak of silver hurtling away from the ship. Mara sat strapped into the seat, her hands gripping the armrests tightly as the pod's thrusters engaged. She watched through the small viewport as the alien vessel grew smaller, its form bathed in the shimmering light of the sphere's activation. Thren, Mara said, her voice barely above a whisper. What's happening now? The ship's energy signature is spiking, Thren replied. It appears Ceres is containing the key's destructive potential. I cannot predict the outcome, but what? Thren paused, as if choosing his words carefully. I believe she will succeed, Dr. Jensen, at great personal cost. Mara's chest tightened as she stared at the ship, now a distant glimmer in the vastness of space. And then, without warning, a burst of light erupted from the vessel, a wave of golden energy that rippled outward in silence, its brilliance eclipsing the stars. When the light faded, the ship was gone. Mara leaned back in her seat, her mind reeling. The enormity of what had just transpired settled over her like a heavy shroud. "Thren," she said softly. "Did she—" "Yes," Thren interrupted. "She succeeded." Mara closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. She had come seeking answers and had found something far greater, a legacy to protect, a burden to bear. As the escape pod drifted through the void, Mara opened her eyes to the stars. They seemed different now, as if Ceres's sacrifice had etched itself into their eternal glow. For the first time, Mara understood what it meant to truly carry the weight of the past, and she knew that her journey was far from over. She would honor Ceres's memory, she would guard the truth, and she would believe.